Hi everybody, this is Jordi V, and today I'm gonna show you how to make a track in the style of Tim Hacker or Aphex Twin's earlier releases, such as selected ambient works. So for this type of compositions, we will be using actually the tempo as a creative tool. So as you might see here, we have the tempo on 60 beats per minute. Since we won't be using percussive elements beats or like drum tracks, so you might get creative with the tempo, use it in your advantage. So slower beats per minute allow us to create slower compositions and give more time to the elements and effects on our textures to evolve and to move. So yeah, I've set my BPM on 60 beats per minute, and I started actually the composition with this chords and melodies. As you might see here, we have basically three chords within the entire compositions and a melody lead. So with the chords, instead of having them play for four bars, I decided to repeat them as you might see here. And later I added the melody line. So this is the initial sketch for the whole composition. So the idea is to come up with the full composition, then layer your elements, have the chords play within an instrument and have the melody play with other instruments to create more interest within the composition. So this is basically what I did here. I started actually with this Omnisphere patch, so let me show you that. So I have this Omnisphere patch which is called, let me show you, Border Crossing from the Unfinished pack preset. I highly advise this pack since it contains a lot of instruments as you might see here, who are a lot of acoustic piano, some strings, some ambient bells. If you are taking ambient music seriously, I highly advise you to invest in this kind of sound patches. So as you might see here, I didn't do a lot of processing with this sound. I just added some EQ8 to cut some of the low frequencies. As for the patch itself, it contains some effects. As you might see here, there is some graphic EQ, some reverb, a limiter and an imager to make it sit well within the stereo field. So yeah, I'll let you listen to this sound on solo. Sorry. So yeah, sorry about that. Let me redo that, yeah. So yeah, as you might hear here, the fact that I've decided to play the notes multiple times instead of have it play and at the first of the bar and the fifth bar gives it that movement and makes it evolve and have it continue to play. It's a lot more interesting played that way. So later I added this sound. Let me solo it. So with this sound, it's basically a Prophet V3, Prophet VS, sorry, preset. I've played a bit with the amp envelope. Later, I've decided to add the Neko Boy from Sound Toys, and I cut some of the low frequencies as well as the high frequencies to curve the sound and gives more space to the other sounds within the composition. Later I've decided to add some Valhalla vintage reverb. As you might see, I added on 100 mix and with some decay here. With this type of songs, you might get away with adding a lot of decay, and even if you have a muddy sound, a distorted sound, it adds to the texture and makes it more interesting. So I highly advise you to experiment with higher levels of reverb, of decay, some more mix, some more pre-delay, and tweak it to your liking. So later I decided to add the Valhalla delay also. And finally I added this auto filter just to automate the sound. So I didn't want the sound to play at the beginning, and since we are within ambient music, the idea is to create some textures and harmonies. So instead of having the sound enter within the composition abruptly, I've decided to automate the auto filter and have it sneak into you and come slowly. So if you listen to that, so yeah, perfect sounding, a lot of texture, a lot of reverb. The sound is large, it occupies a lot of the room within the mix. So this is what we are looking for. The final element is this kind of leady sound. With this sound, I've decided to not add a lot of reverb and make it washy, to have it a bit present. So I started with this Prophet V3 preset. It's called Zen, and as you might see here, we have already some chorus, some analog delay within the preset itself. So later, I've added this Valhalla Vent reverb again, 96%, 96.5 mix, dry wet kind of thing. I usually use the color of the 1970s since we are looking into that some analog feeling to it. Yeah, quite a bit dramatic decay. I didn't play with the damping, neither the shape or the other elements. So that's it for the reverb. Later, I've decided to cut the low frequencies, since our first element here in Omnisphere is occupying the lows. So with this sound, we don't need them. I've decided to add the timeless from FabFilter to play some echo. And again, I automated the auto filter to make the sounds come slowly and not abruptly. And finally, we have the auto pan here, which makes the sounds come from the left on the right and gives it more movement. So yeah, as you might see here, actually the composition was made with the track of Aphex Twin Stone in Focus in mind. So the composition is basic, is minimalistic. I did it with the purpose of making a tutorial for beginners who are struggling with the ambient textures. So as you might see here, you don't need a lot of elements to make this kind of tracks. The key is in your choice of reverb, choice of echo and delays. How would you layer your sound and the initial melodies? And again, reminder, you can use the tempo in your advantage and make it basically make most of the works. So before we wrap up with this tutorial, I might talk a bit about my master chain. So here I have a utility at -3 dB. Since I was a bit lazy during the making of the tutorial, I didn't want to mix my tracks, so it was a bit loud, and I decided to add a -3 dB on the master channel. So I will get rid of that as soon as I finish with the tutorial. Later I have a mastering chain, which is basically an audio effects track from Ableton with 4 channels. So the first channel, sorry, it doesn't contain any effects. The second channel, it contains an SSL compressor from Wave to compress the sound a bit. The third channels actually contain this tape saturation kind of effects again from Wave, which gives it this kind of analogy sound. It gives it that tape saturation lovely effects. So I have it on the mastering soft clean compression preset. I highly advise you to experiment a bit with those settings. And finally, we have this Aphex vintage exciter, and as you might guess, it's an exciter that adds a bit of the harmonics on the high frequencies. I have it on, you can experiment actually with those presets. I basically use the mastering and crisp mastering or dark mix. It depends on the composition I'm working on. So yeah, I found it lovely and I use it mainly on most of my tracks. And finally, I have this maximizer or limiter from Wave again, and it helps me push the increase the volume, the final volume of my tracks. So yeah, maybe I will expand more on my mastering channel. This is basically I'm trying to give you the overall idea and the purpose of each plugin. So yeah, I hope you learned something from this tutorial. Actually, it's pretty basic. I decided to keep it basic and not layer a lot of sounds and not go into percussions or any other elements, since it's not needed for this type of composition. I highly advise you to experiment again with the tempo, with your plugins, and with your reverb and delays, and come up with something similar. So yeah, let me know if you want me to expand on one of these elements in another tutorial, or if you want me to cover any other artist. So hope you liked it, and yeah, peace.